All right, thank you for such a beautiful introduction. Good morning, everyone. My name is Joanna Cardenas, and I am really excited to be here with you all today. I am currently a PhD student at the University of California, Berkeley, in the Department of African American and African Diaspora Studies. Today, I will be giving a brief presentation on my paper titled Girls in the Hood, How Black and Latinx Women Navigate the Streets of South Central Los Angeles. Just to give you all a brief overview of today's conversation, I will start by giving you all a little bit of context on the importance of the work, and then I will go into my research questions, the methods and framework informing this paper, then my findings and its bigger contributions. So to start, South Central is a predominantly Black and Latinx community here in Los Angeles, California, that has a long history with police violence, police brutality, and police murders. Over the years, scholars have analyzed the carceral landscape of the city. However, they often turn their attention to the way gangs, police violence, surveillance, and mass incarceration have socially impacted men in this area, but may not consider the many intersections that form the social experiences of women of color. In this paper, I examine the way inner city life shapes the experiences of Black and Latinx women, with a focus on how state surveillance and policing operates in accordance with race, class, and gender. More specifically, I address the following questions. How does police surveillance shape the social worlds of Black and Latinx women in South Central LA? How does surveillance intersect with race, gender, and class to inform how Black and Latinx women make sense of their carceral experiences? This paper is grounded in a Black feminist theoretical framework that validates the lived experience as a source of knowledge. This work was made possible through the vulnerability and intimate experiences shared with me from 20 women in my community during the summer of 2020. As someone who was born and raised in South Central, the experiences and the direct effects of those experiences inform the lens that I take when analyzing these interviews and understanding I displayed to my participants when we had these conversations. And before I get into the findings, I would like to offer a quick trigger warning, as some of these stories may be triggering for some as it pertains to multiple forms of physical and sexual violence. This paper consisted of collecting, analyzing, and interpreting observations to gain a better understanding of how women in South Central experience police surveillance, how they feel about it, and how they make sense of these experiences as inner city women. The responses from the participants shed light on the everyday surveillance they encounter with police in general due to the high police presence in their neighborhood of South Central. However, their narratives also reveal that inner city women are not only vulnerable to police surveillance, but surveillance from other policing agencies that do not only constitute police officers themselves. They demonstrate how policing expands beyond police interactions, but also to state and governmental agencies like Child Protective Services, courts, and the larger welfare state. Through these narratives, the normalization of these practices are laid bare, highlighting how consistent they are within their neighborhood. Three main ways that informed the carceral experiences of these women were the routine patrolling of their neighborhood, the criminalization some of these women were subjected to across race and class, neglect, violence, and blame placed on victims of intimate partner violence. When it comes to the routine policing that happens here, these stories illustrate that the noise of police sirens and helicopters hovering over their home, walking by the block and seeing patrol cars slowly pass by them, and police officers flashing their bright flashlight across their face never gets old. Heavy police presence is highly normalized, so participants find no issue with the chaos surrounding them. If anything, they feel strange when they are not around the noise that comes with being in South Central. One participant shared, "That's the norm. I hear cops all the time. We refer to the helicopters as the ghetto bird too. I feel like hearing police has become so normal that I can block it out. When I go out to other areas that are more silent though, I feel a lot more uncomfortable." This idea of blocking out the noise is something that many of my participants related to. They mentioned how this technique allows them to make sense of their environment. Although many of the participants know this is not supposed to be normal, they were forced to do so in order to continue on with their daily lives. However, due to how frequently these kinds of invasive practices happen, they are acknowledged more as a routine, making it seem more as a norm instead of a tactic of social control against them as members of this particular community. Simultaneously, they are also participating in a desensitized process that is required to enable them to become used to these dystopian realities. Black and Latinx women are required to develop what Nikki Jones would describe as situated survival strategies to be able to navigate South Central's carceral landscape in their daily lives. Although these strategies are something that all of my participants were able to relate to, these kinds of experiences only highlight one dimension of their lived experience. With heavy police presence in inner city neighborhoods comes the possibility of being stopped, searched, interrogated, racially profiled, and criminalized by police officers for simply being a resident in this area. Many of the respondents opened up about an experience they had while sitting on their porch, in their home, while walking to school, or walking towards the liquor store in the corner, where something similar happened. They expressed how these forms of interactions made them feel unsafe because they would expect for police officers to be respectful and nice to them. However, they received aggressive behavior by law enforcement and neglect towards their feelings of fear, unsafety, and confusion. This was Kendra's story. Kendra is a 26-year-old Black woman who lived in South Central her whole life. She was formerly incarcerated in another state when she was younger, so she mentioned how she has had a lot of experiences where she has been criminalized, racially profiled, and surveilled by those around her. One particular incident was when she was accused of murder despite having nothing to do with it. Kendra had gone out with her mother, her 21-year-old sister, and a couple of friends to eat. When they left the restaurant, they were followed by 20 police officers to her home once they entered the outskirts of South Central. Multiple helicopters hovered above her car as she was instructed to get out of the vehicle with guns pointing at her from all sides. Police demanded her and the other women to lay on the ground and handcuff them. At the same time, none of them knew why this was happening. Kendra later found out that a girl's face had been slashed at a party and her car fit the description, a white car with Black females in it. When asked how this made her feel, she looked down at the floor and reflected. You see this in movies and don't believe it until it happens to you. I thought I was going to die. Us being women, we shouldn't be dragged out of our car. They say there are some females who make it harder for them to do their job, but a lot of us are just scared. Police take their power too far. It's fucked up. We are simply afraid, not resisting. You never want to be that person people will say, #say her name. Kendra mentioned how afterwards the police officers just left by saying, our bad, we got the wrong person. This made her feel very angry and scared because she thought about the kind of power police have that allows them to make these kinds of accusations. What this incident also shows us, though, is the way inner city women are subjected to being criminalized, intimidated by police, specifically Black women, without the acknowledgement or consideration of the harm inflicted on them by these types of unwanted interactions. One of the other findings presented in this paper speaks to the expansion of policing to other policing agencies like courts and social services that subject inner city women to a variety of different forms of control, violence, and surveillance simultaneously. For participants like Faith, a multitude of agencies work together to control and surveil not only her, but her children as well. She described to me the violence that occurred in her home physically, verbally, and sexually against her, and later on she found out her daughter. In 2010, 6 police officers invaded her home and walked out with her former partner in handcuffs. He was being arrested for molesting their daughter. However, instead of receiving support, she was met with social workers a few minutes later. The social workers interrogated her and her 2 other children individually about what had happened in their household. The social workers, after being done with the interrogation process, they told her they would be taking all 3 of her children to a foster home because of her inability to protect them from their father. Instantly, she was victim blamed for what her former partner had done. One day before Mother's Day, she witnessed her 12-year-old daughter, 10-year-old son, and 6-month-old daughter enter the social worker's vehicle and leave. In this specific case, Faith's children and herself was stripped away from the only support they had left, each other. With tears running down her face, she expressed the hurt this caused her. They blamed me for what happened and told me I could have prevented this. They broke my heart. I saw my 3 kids go into their car. I was left on the floor crying. She was then instructed by a family court to remove all of her partner's belongings from the home, apply for financial benefits from the state, change the structure of her home, to be able to get her children back in 3 days. She did what was instructed and was able to get her kids back in the first hearing. However, the interactions she had with the court, police, and social workers did not stop there. For the next 3 years, she would be surveilled by detectives for the ongoing case of her ex-husband and by social workers for the next 4 years while her case was fully closed. Her lived experiences show how social services and the criminal justice system can coexist with one another to control, surveil, and police families in inner city communities. Much like Faith, several other participants discussed their vulnerability to what Dorothy Roberts describes as state intrusion, and the ways in which police practices like excessive surveillance and control function together to dictate the everyday interactions of not only women, but young children with institutional actors as well. Collectively, what these experiences show is the vulnerability of women within the carceral state of South Central. Aside from not receiving proper support for their experiences, their issues are not prioritized and are often victims of violence that institutions reproduce through carceral practices they enact against them. These practices consist of constant surveillance, entitlement to invade their homes, being criminalized and being blamed for their experiences, stripping them away from their positions as victims. These stories not only demonstrate that women are also impacted by the broader practices of surveillance and policing that happen every day in South Central, but they also acknowledge the importance of recognizing the linkages between their experiences in relation to race, class, and gender. Most importantly, the women in the study also challenge us to think deeper about the complexities of the carceral state and its contribution to how we think about policing. Having an analysis of policing and surveillance that encompass both race and gender in particular allows us to see how these practices go beyond the physical walls of confinement, but how they are all around us for the purposes of reconstructing power, violence, and social control across space. As the experiences of these women in South Central show, policing does not only take one singular form for inner-city women. It takes a multitude of forms simultaneously to inform and shape Black and Latinx women's carceral experiences. So when we talk about what a utopian world would look like for women in South Central, it would be a world where there is no policing state to resist. Thank you all for your time.